The sun dipped low over the New Mexico horizon, casting long shadows across the desert as Evelyn Hart stood alone near a circle of trampled grass and half-buried wagon ruts. Her cotton bonnet was askew, her skin smudged with dust, and her eyes wide with disbelief. She had only stepped away to relieve herself and gather wild sage no more than 10 minutes. She swore, but when she returned, the wagon train was gone. No campfire smoke. No voices, no creaking wheels. Nothing but the vast, empty wilderness stretching in every direction. Her breath caught in her throat. They'd forgotten her. Panic surged up her chest, followed by anger. She tried to convince herself it was a mistake, that someone would notice soon, that they'd circle back. But the wagon master had little patience for delay, and Evelyn had been quiet, nearly invisible, since her parents died of fever just weeks before. Without family, she'd become an afterthought. Now she was something worse. Stranded. Hours passed. She wandered in circles, trying to pick up a trail, but the dusty wind swallowed the prints. By late afternoon, her feet ached and her lips cracked from thirst. She stumbled into a low patch of brush and collapsed beside it, lighting a small fire from what dry twigs she could gather. She had no bedroll, no food, only a tin canteen with a mouthful of warm water. As dusk fell, Evelyn curled herself into a ball and stared at the fire. Coyotes howled in the distance. She gripped the handle of her father's old skinning knife, tucked in her boot, and whispered his name like a prayer. When her eyes finally closed, it was from sheer exhaustion. She never heard him approach. At first, she thought it was part of a dream, the warmth of a fire, a shadow passing over her face. Then came the soft crunch of footsteps on grit. Evelyn's eyes snapped open, and she sat bolt upright. Standing a few feet away was a tall figure, half lit by moonlight, half shadowed by the flames. He wore a long, weathered deerskin coat, streaked with dust. His face was marked with soot and paint, his black hair braided and tied with leather cords. He was massive, broad-shouldered, and silent, as still as the red cliffs beyond. Her first thought was Apache. Her second was run, but her body wouldn't obey. Her legs were too weak, her throat too dry to scream. The warrior didn't move. He studied her like a man might study a wild animal, cautious and respectful. After a long silence, he stepped forward, not aggressively, but with purpose, and crouched beside the fire. Slowly, from the pouch at his hip, he pulled a small bundle wrapped in cloth and placed it on the ground before her. She blinked. It was food, roasted rabbit. Still warm. Then, in a deep, measured voice that startled her with its clarity, he said, "Come with me." She flinched. "Well, why?" She managed to whisper. The warrior said nothing more. He didn't threaten her, didn't touch her. He simply stood, waiting. Evelyn's mind raced. Every tale she'd heard on the trail warned against this exact moment, being captured, traded, or worse. But this didn't feel like that. There was no rope, no violence, no grin of dominance. Only a man, tired, alone, offering her food and safety. Still, she hesitated. Trust could kill you out here, but so could staying put. The flames between them crackled. Coyotes howled again, closer now. Her firewood was nearly gone. The darkness pressed in like a warning. She grabbed the food with trembling hands and took a cautious bite. It was real, hot, tender. Her body reacted before her mind could argue. She ate ravenously. The warrior didn't flinch, just turned, slowly, and began walking away, toward the cliffs. Halfway up the ridge, he looked back, didn't speak, just waited. Evelyn stared at the dying fire. Her stomach was no longer empty, but her fear wasn't gone. Yet, something in her chest stirred. Not trust. Not yet. But something like instinct. She stood, brushing dirt from her dress. Her hand hovered over the knife in her boot, then let it fall. She took a step toward the ridge. Then another dot, and without quite knowing why, she followed him. Evelyn Hart had no idea where the Apache warrior was leading her. The trail wound sharply upward, narrowing into a steep pass carved by wind and time. Moonlight draped everything in a cold, silvery glow, but the man ahead moved like he'd made the journey 1,000 times. He never turned around, never offered a word. Evelyn's legs ached. The thin soles of her boots slipped on loose gravel, and every few minutes she had to pause and clutch her side. But she kept moving, because staying behind meant facing the desert alone. And somehow, following this silent stranger felt like the safer choice. After nearly an hour, the narrow pass opened into a plateau. Boulders sat like sentinels under the stars. Beyond them, a cleft in the rock revealed a dark hollow, hidden from view unless you stood right in front of it. The Apache warrior ducked beneath a ledge and disappeared into the shadows. Evelyn hesitated, heart pounding. Her mind screamed at her to be careful, but her body, tired and frozen from the desert wind, begged for shelter. She crouched and crawled in after him. Inside, the space opened wider than she expected, tall enough to stand, with smooth walls that retained some warmth from the day's sun. A small fire crackled at the far end, flickering against the stone. A woven mat rested nearby, beside a low stack of dried herbs and pelts. The warrior was already seated, slicing dried meat with a bone-handled blade. Without looking at her, he pushed a sliver toward her across a flat stone. She took it, still silent. Minutes passed. The only sounds were the fire, the wind whistling past the cave mouth, and the soft scrape of his knife against the meat. Finally she asked, "What's your name?" He looked up. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black and sharp with quiet intelligence. "Dakota," he said. "It means friend to all. A name, a meaning." That was more than she expected. She wrapped her arms around her knees. Evelyn Hart." He gave a faint nod, as if he'd already guessed that much. She studied him from across the fire. The lines of his face were hard, but not cruel. Scars marked his cheek and one shoulder, visible beneath the open collar of his deerskin. He looked like a man who had survived many fights and had no interest in more. "Why'd you help me?" she asked softly. Dakota didn't answer right away. He sliced another strip of meat, slower this time, then replied, "You were alone, lost. Fire was small. You had no knife in your hand." Evelyn blinked. "So if I'd been holding a knife—" He didn't smile, but his voice held the faintest trace of dry humor. "Then maybe I'd have stayed behind the trees." She allowed herself a weak laugh. It felt strange in her throat. Most men would have just walked on, or worse. Most men forget the land watches everything. He sighed. "You help a living thing, the land helps you later." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. She stared into the fire. In the flickering light, her dress looked grayer than usual, torn at the sleeve, caked with sand. Her hands were blistered. Her fingernails cracked. "What now?" she whispered. "Am I your prisoner?" Dakota's gaze darkened, not with anger, but with something quieter, sadder. "No." "Then, why did you bring me here?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was in a low, even voice. "Because last time I didn't, she died." Evelyn sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Dakota's jaw tightened. He rose to his feet, walked to the cave mouth, and looked out into the moonlight. "Years ago, a woman like you, alone near the spring. I left her food and walked away. 2 days later, white men found her body. She'd wandered toward the cliffs, fell." Evelyn swallowed hard. "She was a settler?" He nodded once. "She was kind. Kindness should live." The wind outside howled softly, like a distant voice mourning something already lost. Evelyn didn't press him further. She sat quietly as the fire faded to embers, the cave holding its warmth like a gentle breath. Her fear hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled her. Not completely. Dakota took up a spear and lay down near the entrance, positioning himself like a watchman between her and whatever might come in the night. She lay on the mat, still wrapped in dust and grief. But for the first time in days, she let her eyes close with a sense of uneasy safety. Somewhere deep in her heart, she whispered a silent truth she couldn't yet say aloud. She wanted to believe him, even if she couldn't trust him yet. She wanted to try. The sun had barely risen over the plains when the first whispers began to spread through the settlement. Gone, you say? Didn't see her since last night. Wagon left early, she wasn't with them? Voices mingled with the morning. Routines, boots stomping in dust, bacon crackling in pans, water sloshing in tin buckets. But something hung heavier in the air than the scent of smoke and sweat, unease. It started with the baker's neighbors who'd camped nearest Evelyn the night before. They realized halfway through loading their wagon that no one had seen the quiet young woman since sundown. She always kept to herself, Mrs. Baker murmured. Didn't even talk much when her folks were alive. She probably wandered off, someone muttered. These things happen. But Evelyn Hart wasn't just missing, she had vanished. And not a single soul had noticed until too late. By noon, a small group of men had ridden back along the trail, following wagon ruts and scattered boot prints. At a stretch of dried creek bed, they found a pile of burned wood, still warm. Nearby were scraps of rabbit bone and a depression in the grass where someone had slept. No blood. No torn clothing. But tracks. Big ones. Apache. That single word whispered and repeated spread like wildfire. Apache took her. She's been captured. Maybe worse. By dusk, the town buzzed with speculation. The settlement's leader, Reverend Malcolm Coates, gathered men in the church-turned meeting hall and addressed the growing panic. We do not yet know what happened to Miss Hart, he said, trying to steady the crowd. Let us not assume the worst. But his voice couldn't compete with the old fears lurking just beneath every settler's skin. Many remembered raids. Some had lost kin. And to them, Evelyn's disappearance fit a story they already believed. She was a pretty thing, muttered Amos Clary, a wiry man with a whiskey-red face. Wouldn't be the first they took for a bride. Or a hostage, another man added, or bait. Reverend Coates raised a hand. If she is with them, she may be alive. We will send a party to look-track the prince, negotiate her release. Negotiate? Amos barked. With savages? The room split, some nodding in agreement, others silent with worry. One voice rose unexpectedly from the back. She ain't the kind to run, said a girl named Letty, maybe 16, clutching her apron with trembling hands. Miss Evelyn, she gave me half her bread 2 nights ago. She was sad, but she wasn't crazy. She didn't run. Then someone took her. Someone else growled. No one had the heart to say what everyone was thinking. If Evelyn had been taken, and by an Apache warrior, no less, there was a good chance she was already beyond saving. Back at the cave, nestled in the sheltering arms of the red cliffs, Evelyn sat by the fire beside Dakota. She didn't know that her name was being spoken back in the settlement, spoken in worry, in judgment, in fear. She only knew that every hour she spent away from that world felt like shedding a skin that never quite fit her. The cave smelled of sage and ash. Dakota had prepared a broth from wild onions and roots, and though it was bitter, Evelyn ate without complaint. Hunger dulled pride quickly. She still kept her distance from him, physically and emotionally, but something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer strained. It was companionable. That night, she asked him, "Do you think they're looking for me?" Dakota poked at the fire. "Yes, they will think I took you. You didn't, I know." She looked away. They won't believe that." He didn't respond, but his eyes flickered, perhaps with understanding, perhaps with regret. "Will your people accept me?" she asked softly, his brow furrowed. "Some, not all. They remember what settlers did. Burned homes. Took children. Broke promises." Evelyn's face flushed. "I didn't do any of that," Dakota nodded slowly, "but your skin will remind them." Her heart twisted. "Then I don't belong anywhere, do I?" A long silence followed. Finally, he said, "Maybe that's why I found you." She didn't understand what he meant. Not fully. But the words stayed with her as she curled up beside the warm stone, eyes fluttering shut. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, wind whispered through. The brush, carrying rumors from one world to the next. Back in the settlement, the search party saddled their horses at dawn, rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them tied a white cloth to the end of his musket barrel, a symbol of peace or surrender, depending on who you asked. As they rode toward the canyons, none of them spoke aloud the truth they all knew. If Evelyn Hart was still alive, she might not want to come back. The canyon rose like a cathedral of ancient fire, its walls streaked in rust red and gold, the kind of place Evelyn had once seen on a traveler's sketch, beautiful and frightening in equal measure. For 2 days, Dakota led her deeper into the wild, through dry riverbeds and narrow gullies that twisted like the folds of a forgotten map. They spoke little, not because they had nothing to say, but because silence became their rhythm. She trusted him now, but carefully, like one might trust a mountain lion that hadn't pounced yet. On the third evening, as the sun spilled gold across the stone, Dakota led her to a narrow crevice nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. A thick wall of boulders blocked the opening, but he stepped between them with practiced ease. Evelyn followed and gasped. On the other side was a hidden plateau, walled in by rock and sky. Tucked into a series of shallow caves and shelters was a small Apache camp. Smoke curled upward from cooking fires. Horses grazed near the stream that trickled through the rock. A few children chased each other barefoot while older women ground corn beside hanging bundles of herbs. It was peaceful. It was alive. Every eye turned toward them as Dakota entered, with Evelyn trailing behind, her blonde hair tangled and her pale dress caked with dust. Conversation stopped. Movement stilled. The air felt thick with caution and something else, resentment. A tall man in a beaded vest stepped forward. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with streaks of gray in his hair and lines around his eyes carved deep by the sun. He looked at Dakota, then Evelyn, then back again. A quiet word passed between them in Apache. Evelyn couldn't understand the language, but the tone was unmistakable. Questioning, wary, almost angry. Dakota responded evenly, but his jaw clenched. More murmurs rippled through the camp. A few women pulled their children behind them. One younger man spat in the dust and walked away. Evelyn's stomach knotted. She stood very still. At last, the older man stepped aside and gestured toward a rock shelter near the edge of camp. It was modest, just a hollow beneath the canyon wall with a woven mat and a small fire pit. But it was shelter. Dakota led her there without a word. Only after they'd reached the space did Evelyn speak. "They don't want me here," she whispered. "No," Dakota replied. "But they won't harm you. Because of you?" He nodded. "Because I spoke for you." She looked toward the people still watching her, some with blank faces, others with narrowed eyes. "What did you tell them?" Dakota looked away, jaw tight. "That you are not enemy, that you are alone, that I will take the blame if it goes wrong." Evelyn felt a coldness settle in her chest. "You risked yourself for me?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, as the canyon glowed under a rising moon, Evelyn sat by her small fire and listened to the sounds of the camp, distant laughter, the clip of horse hooves on Stone, soft singing in a language she couldn't understand. She didn't belong here. She felt it in every glance, every stiff silence. But for the first time in her life, she wanted to belong. A girl no older than 10 approached her fire near dusk. She was quiet, curious, clutching a half-woven bracelet. Evelyn smiled gently and held out her hand. The girl hesitated, then placed the bracelet in Evelyn's palm and ran back toward the shadows. Evelyn's throat tightened. Dakota watched the exchange from a distance. He didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Later, as he brought her a bowl of stew, she asked, "Why do they fear me?" "I'm just a girl who got left behind." He looked into the fire, his voice low. "Not you. What you represent. They have long memories. They remember white men breaking treaties, soldiers burning homes, children taken away. And they think I'm part of that? They don't know your heart yet. Just your skin." Evelyn clenched her fists. "Then I'll show them." Dakota tilted his head. "You cannot change their minds in a day." "I don't need a day," she said. "I just need a chance." Far away, the search party rode through the desert, unaware they were already being watched. 2 young Apache scouts tracked them from the cliffs, silent as shadows. They did not engage, but they took note of every rifle, every saddlebag, every face. The word would reach camp soon. The settlers were coming, and if Evelyn was still among the Apache, the decision would no longer be hers alone. The mornings in the canyon came early and cold, the kind of chill that crept into Evelyn's bones before she even opened her eyes. Still, she rose with the others. No one had assigned her chores, but she refused to sit idle while the Apache. Women worked from sunrise to dusk hauling water, drying meat, tending to fires. At first, they watched her with suspicion, muttering in words she couldn't understand. But Evelyn kept at it. She mimicked the older women carefully, helping grind corn, sort herbs, and clean fish when they allowed. Her hands grew blistered, her dress more tattered with each passing day, but slowly, the wall of silence around her began to crack. One woman offered her a woven shawl for the cold mornings. Another passed her a hunk of warm bread without a word. And each evening, when she returned to the rock shelter where Dakota kept his quiet vigil, she felt just a little less like a ghost in someone else's world. But still, the tension never vanished. Not entirely. Especially when Dakota was nearby. He had become her shadow, always watching, always keeping her safe. Yet he rarely smiled, rarely spoke more than necessary. And at night, when he thought she was asleep, he'd stand just beyond the fire, staring up at the canyon rim, eyes dark with something Evelyn couldn't name. One night, after the others had retired to their shelters, she finally asked the question that had been growing in her chest for days. "Knew a white woman before, didn't you?" Dakota didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders stiffen. "She died," he said simply. "I know, you told me. But not why it matters so much to you. Why did you bring me here? Why risk your standing with your people for a stranger?" He was silent for a long time. The fire cracked. A nightbird cried from the rocks. Then, in a voice rough with memory, he began to speak. Her name was Rachel McKay. She was the daughter of a trader. He came to our land with goods, knives, blankets, trinkets. Thought he could make peace by selling things. But peace cannot be traded. Evelyn listened quietly, heart thudding. Rachel was different. She wanted to learn. She came back often. Learned our words, ate our food, laughed with my sister. "You loved her," Evelyn whispered. Double quotes, "Yes." He finally turned toward her, eyes reflecting the firelight like coals. She tried to live between 2 worlds, but neither wanted her. Her people called her a traitor. Mine said she was dangerous. One day, a soldier patrol caught her riding with me. They threatened her. She ran. She fell from the cliffs trying to escape. Evelyn's breath caught. Dakota's jaw tightened. I found her body below the canyon. The wind covered her tracks. The birds had come already. No one claimed her. Number. One mourned her but me. Evelyn reached forward, touching the edge of his hand where it rested on the ground. I'm sorry. He didn't pull away. I left her food and walked away. I thought she'd find her way back. She didn't. Evelyn swallowed hard. So when you saw me sleeping alone, you remembered her. He nodded. I wasn't Rachel, Evelyn said. Gently. But I could have ended like her. Dakota looked into the fire. You still might. The words weren't cruel. They were honest. That was worse. The next day, tension buzzed through the camp like a summer storm. Dakota was summoned. By the elders. Evelyn watched him walk across the camp to the council circle, his shoulders squared, his spear slung across his back. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the raised voices, the hand gestures, and the way every pair of eyes kept flicking toward her told her everything. She was still a problem. An outsider. Later that afternoon, Dakota returned to their shelter and sat across from her. He looked wearier than she'd ever seen him. They want you to leave, he said, flatly. Her heart sank. Now? Soon, before the scouts return with news of the settlers. So they are coming. He nodded. They are 2 days out. 10 men, rifles. Your name was spoken. Evelyn's mind raced. If they see me with you, they will think I forced you, or worse. But you didn't, she said. No one will believe that, he replied. She looked him in the eyes. I believe it, his jaw clenched. Then you may die for that belief. Evelyn felt something stir inside her, not fear, but defiance. Then let me speak for myself. You won't be heard. Then I'll make them listen. That night, as the canyon wind howled and the fire flickered low, Evelyn didn't sleep. Neither did Dakota. They sat side by side, watching the stars, and without a word spoken between them, something changed, something stronger than trust, deeper than gratitude. A bond had formed, forged in silence, tempered by loss, and ready for the storm that was coming. The sun rose red and wide over the canyon, spilling its warning light across the stone walls. By mid-morning, the first scout returned to the Apache camp, his horse lathered with sweat and flanks coated in dust. He rode straight to the elders' shelter, where Dakota was already waiting. Evelyn stood nearby, watching the grim exchange from a distance. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. But her eyes locked with Dakota's the moment he emerged from the meeting. They're close, aren't they? She asked. He nodded once. Tomorrow. How many? 10 men, horses, rifles. They come with a white cloth raised, but their hearts carry knives. Evelyn's hands tightened into fists. They think I've been taken against my will. Dakota looked her over with an unreadable expression. They sent a messenger ahead, 1 man. He waits with a note at the base of the northern trail. A note? He pulled it from his pouch and handed it to her. The paper was creased and dust-stained. The ink, though smeared in places, was still legible. To Miss Evelyn Hart. If you are still among the Apache, know that we are here to bring you home. You will not be judged for the circumstances of your disappearance. However, we cannot ensure peace if you refuse to return. You are not safe with them. If you are being held, give us a sign. If you have chosen to remain, we will consider it a betrayal. Return by sundown tomorrow, or not at all. No signature. No warmth. Just cold lines that made her skin prickle. They don't understand, she said softly. They don't want to. Dakota replied. Evelyn paced in a slow circle, the wind tugging at the hem of her dress. They're not offering peace. They're demanding obedience. He looked at her. They offer a cage. Painted white. She met his gaze. And what does your tribe offer me, Dakota? A place where I'm feared? Where they look at me like I might poison the water? He didn't flinch. I offer you truth. No lies, no promises. Her chest rose and fell. I don't want to choose between two places where I don't belong. You may have no choice. The elders gathered again at dusk. This time, Evelyn was summoned. She stepped into the circle, heart pounding, surrounded by firelight and sharp, weathered eyes. Dakota stood behind her, silent but steady. An old woman with braids down her back spoke first in Apache. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, curious, cautious, layered with warning. She asks if you will leave with your people tomorrow, Dakota translated. Evelyn swallowed. If I do, they'll make me swear the Apache are savage and cruel, that you forced me, that I was a victim. Another elder, a lean man with hawk-like eyes, spoke next. His voice was flat and unyielding. He says you are a settler. You bring trouble. Even now, you bring white men with guns. I didn't ask for them, she snapped. A third elder, softer than the others, tilted her head. She spoke gently. Tako translated. She asks where your heart lies. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a long moment, she breathed the air of the bay. Canyon, the scent of wood smoke and sun-drenched stone. I don't know where my heart lies, she admitted. But I know where I've been treated like I matter. And it wasn't with the ones calling themselves my people. Silence fell. Then the hawk-eyed elder stood and spat into the dust. No white woman stays without bringing death, Dakota whispered. He says, you will poison what little peace we have left. Evelyn's voice rose, steady and clear. Or maybe I could be something different. Something in between. Something that proves two worlds don't have to stay enemies forever, her words echoed. No one replied. Dakota gently touched her elbow and guided her out of the circle. Later. As they sat by the fire alone, Evelyn said quietly, they'll ride up tomorrow expecting me to run to them. Yes. What happens if I don't? They will say I was brainwashed, that I was corrupted, that I must be taken by force. Evelyn nodded. Then I'll speak for myself. I want to face them. On my own terms. Dakota studied her. You sure? She met his eyes. If I run now, I'll never stop running. Far down the trail, just beyond the canyon's edge, the settlement's riders set up camp. Their rifles were polished, their horses fed, their tempers short. None of them believed Evelyn Hart would return willingly. Some doubted she was still alive. Others, like Amos Clary, sharpened their knives and muttered that if she had gone native, they'd just as soon leave her to rot, but tomorrow would bring answers. And in the shadow of the cliffs, one young woman prepared to stand before two worlds, not begging to be taken back, but demanding to be heard. The canyon was still before dawn, its walls holding the last whispers of the night like a prayer waiting to be answered. Evelyn Hart braided her hair with shaking fingers, her breath hitching each time she thought about what was coming. The settlements. Men would arrive soon, expecting her to run back, weeping with gratitude, afraid and broken. She planned to do none of that. She stepped into the dim morning light wearing the shawl one of the older Apache women had given her. It wasn't a declaration of allegiance. It was a quiet sign of where she had been, of who had helped her survive when her own people had left her behind. Dakota stood waiting beside his horse, the lines of his face still and unreadable. He wore his war paint, faint but clear, an echo of the warrior he had once been. He carried no rifle, only a bow and his spear, strapped across his back. You don't have to come, Evelyn said. Dakota's gaze didn't waver. I do. I want to speak to them myself. I will not stop you, he said. But if they raise a rifle, I will not let them harm you. She hesitated. They might fire just because you're there. Yes. And you'll still come? Yes. Evelyn mounted the small mare Dakota had prepared for her. Her heart was pounding harder than it had the day she was left behind. Then she'd been forgotten. Today she would not be. They rode out together, two figures cutting across the rocky path, the sun rising behind them like fire on stone. The meeting place was a stretch of dry arroyo flanked by juniper trees and broken shale. The riders from the settlement were already there, 10 men, all armed, their horses restless beneath them. A white cloth was tied to a rifle barrel, flapping gently in the breeze. When they saw Evelyn riding out beside an Apache warrior, their expressions turned to stone. Amos Clary spat. "Well, I'll be damned. She's riding with him?" Another muttered. "Don't move," Reverend Coates said, raising his hand. "Let's hear what she says." Evelyn dismounted and stepped forward, unarmed, hands open. She looked at them, all these familiar faces, and realized how small they looked now. "How narrow." "Miss Hart," Reverend Coates called out, "you don't have to do this. If he's forcing you, say the word. We'll take you home." "No one's forcing me," Evelyn replied. Her voice was steady, clear. "I've been living among the Apache. They gave me food, shelter, safety. They didn't point rifles at me." "Girl, he's using you," Amos snapped. "They're playing you like fools. You think he's not going to hand you off to his war party once we leave?" "No," she said firmly. "I know who abandoned me. And I know who didn't." A few men shifted uncomfortably. Reverend Coates tried a softer tone. "We were worried. We sent men to find you. We thought you might be confused." "I was left behind," she said. "Not taken, not stolen, forgotten." "Evelyn," another man said, "you're white. You belong with your own people." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "You left me behind without a second thought. Dakota found me. He didn't hurt me. He saved me. Why does skin decide where someone belongs?" A tense silence fell over the group. Then Dakota stepped forward. He didn't speak until he stood beside Evelyn, tall and unbending, his voice quiet. "But carrying across the rocks, she was alone, dying. I helped her." "You want to punish her for surviving with us," Amos snorted. "You expect us to believe you didn't lay hands on her?" Dakota's stare was icy. "I expect nothing from you." Rifle shifted. Hands hovered near triggers. Evelyn's voice cut through the rising tension. "If you raise a gun, there will be blood. Not just his, yours, mine, all of it wasted." Reverend Coates looked weary. "So what then, Miss Hart? You stay with them?" "I choose my own path," she said. "And it's not back to a town that only remembered me when it was convenient." "Then don't come crawling back when they turn on you," Amos snapped. Evelyn walked backward slowly, never turning her back. "I won't crawl. I never did." They rode away from the settlement men, who stood stunned in the dust. Evelyn's body trembled from the confrontation, but she didn't cry. Back in the canyon, the elders waited. Dakota didn't say a word as they returned. He simply looked at her, eyes softening. "You stood between fire and storm," he said. "You did not burn." "I'm tired of being burned," she whispered. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I'm ready to live." The dust hadn't yet settled when the settlement men rode back into camp, tense and red-faced. The meeting with Evelyn had not gone the way they'd hoped. No rescue, no gratitude, no frightened woman clinging to their arms. Just Evelyn Hart defiant, proud, standing beside an Apache warrior and refusing to come home. "She's gone native," Amos Clary hissed as he tossed his saddlebag to the ground. Reverend Coates sat by the fire, face drawn and tired. "She's made a choice." "It ain't a choice if you've been brainwashed," Amos barked. "They got her up there in that canyon like some prize. She's probably sleeping in that redskin's tent." Coates stood, his voice sharper than usual. "Enough, Amos. This isn't about your pride. Amos spat. It's about what's right. She's one of us. They took her. Coates narrowed his eyes. You're not mad because she's missing. You're mad because she didn't want to be found. That shut Amos up, at least for the moment, but the damage had already begun. Around the fire, the other men shifted in unease. Some were angry, others confused, but most were scared. Not of Evelyn. Not even of Dakota. They were scared of what her choice meant. Back in the canyon, Evelyn sat by the creek, dipping her sore feet into the cold water. Her limbs ached from the ride, but her mind raced. She had spoken her truth, but the danger hadn't passed. If anything, it had grown. The Apache scouts had seen the restlessness in the settlers' camp. They whispered of men sharpening blades, oiling rifles. The elders grew nervous. Some muttered that she had brought too much attention to their hidden home. Others warned of betrayal. That night, Dakota came to her quietly. There is talk, he said. Some say we must leave. That you are the reason we are no longer safe. Evelyn stood. Then I'll go, he frowned. Alone, you will not survive. I didn't come here to put them at risk. You are not the only risk, he said. Men like Amos want a fight, with or without you. She looked toward the cliffs. Then let me talk to them again. Dakota's voice hardened. They do not come to talk. He was right. Before dawn, the Apache scouts saw the first signs. Boot prints where there shouldn't be, disturbed brush, and the glint of steel half buried in the sand. Ambush. The settlers were no longer waiting for Evelyn to return. They were coming. A war party was forming. And no white flag would be raised this time. The Apache moved fast. Women and children began packing what little they could carry. The camp would be abandoned by nightfall. Too dangerous to stay. Too risky to fight. But Dakota refused to run. This is our land, he said. We know every trail, every crack in the rock. If they fire first, we finish it. Evelyn watched as he and 4 other warriors prepared for battle. She wanted to beg him to leave, to disappear into the cliffs, to let the settlers waste their bullets on wind and sand, but she also knew he wouldn't. The settlers came at mid-morning fast, guns drawn. Eyes wild. They didn't come looking for Evelyn. They came to silence what scared them. The first shot rang out from the ridge, a warning or a mistake. No one would ever agree. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire cracked across the canyon. Horses screamed. The canyon walls echoed with chaos. Evelyn dropped to the ground behind a rock ledge, clutching a fallen child and covering her ears as the battle thundered around her. She saw Dakota on the ridge, loosing arrows with terrifying precision. A settler fell from his saddle, blood staining the dust. Another fired wildly into the shadows and caught an Apache youth in the leg. Reverend Coates, trying to hold the line, shouted for the men to fall back. You fools, they were ready. Pull back. Amos didn't listen. He rode straight toward the sheltering campfires with a torch. In hand. Evelyn stood. She stepped into the open. Stop. She screamed. Amos turned. Too late. Dakota saw him. His bowstring sang. The arrow struck Amos clean in the shoulder. He fell, screaming, dropping the torch before it could light anything more than dust. The other settlers scattered, retreating under. A hail of arrows and curses. No Apache chased them. They didn't need to. They had sent their message. We are not helpless. When it was over, the camp was still. Smoke drifted through the canyon. Blood stained the rocks in dark, ugly smears. 1 Apache lay dead. 2 others wounded. The settlers had lost 3. Evelyn stood beside Dakota, hands shaking. They'll come back, she whispered. Yes, he said. With more men, more guns. Then we'll be hunted. He nodded. And what now? She asked. Dakota looked down at her. Now we do what survivors do. We move. The Apache packed their camp in silence. Evelyn helped to wherever she could, her hands no longer soft or foreign. As the sun dropped behind the cliffs, the last horse stepped onto the trail. Dakota turned to her. "You can still go," he said. "Back to them. Say you were taken. They'll believe it now." Evelyn stared toward the empty horizon. "I'm not going back," she said. "If they're going to lie about me, I'd rather live where no one speaks with a forked tongue." The path ahead was steep, uncertain, and marked in blood, but she wasn't alone, and this time she wasn't afraid. By the time the Apache camp disappeared behind the canyon walls, Evelyn Hart had left behind not only her past, but her name as it was once known. She no longer felt like the girl who'd climbed into a wagon with her parents, hopeful and fragile. But Evelyn had been buried in the dust alongside the others who never looked back for her. What remained now was something forged in hardship and sharpened by choice. They traveled northeast, through scorched gulches and hidden ravines known only to those who'd walked them for generations. Dakota led the way, flanked by the other warriors. The wounded rode in makeshift stretchers. Children clung to their mothers. And Evelyn walked. It was her choice. Every blister, every burning mile was her proof. I belong here because I stayed. On the fourth day, they reached a narrow valley framed by towering rocks and wild mesquite. It was quieter here. No echo of gunfire, no scent of blood in the air. Just the wind, the birds, and the soft murmur of a creek threading through stone. The Apache would rest here for several nights. The wounded needed healing, and so did the Jilam, spirit of the tribe. Still, the tension hadn't faded. Evelyn could feel it, watchful eyes, wary hearts, even among those who had grown used to her presence. Her courage had earned their respect, yes, but respect wasn't the same as trust. And some believed she had brought war to their doorstep, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. That evening, as the firelight danced against the canyon wall, an elder woman approached Evelyn. She was wrapped in layers of patterned cloth, her braids streaked with silver. She had barely spoken to Evelyn before, but now she sat beside her and placed something small in her hands. A piece of carved bone, shaped like a hawk feather. The woman nodded solemnly. "You did not run when the fire came. You stood. You are not Apache, but you carry the courage of one." Evelyn stared at the token, her eyes burning. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I don't want to be honored for what I survived. I want to be useful." The woman smiled faintly. "Then rise early, learn the land, help the children, clean the wounds. Be a woman who gives more than she takes." And Evelyn did. The next morning, she woke before dawn and helped grind cornmeal with blistered hands. She changed bandages, fetched water, even comforted a crying toddler whose father hadn't returned from the canyon. Slowly, the looks of suspicion began to shift, not into smiles, but into nods, into space beside the fire, into the sound of her name spoken softly instead of with distrust. Evelyn hadn't forgotten the men who had come for blood, nor had Dakota. They spoke quietly each night, just the two of them, as stars filled the black sky overhead. They knew the settlement wouldn't leave things as they were. Too many men had died. Too many lies had been told to ever make peace without more pain. "They'll say you were held hostage," Dakota murmured. "They will make themselves the heroes again." Evelyn nodded slowly. "They'll lie until it fits their story, and people will believe it, because that's easier than admitting they were wrong." "What will you do?" he asked. She looked into the fire. "Tell the truth one way or another." He turned his head toward her. "That is dangerous. So is silence." Dakota studied her a long time, then said quietly, "You could take a name among us." She blinked. "A name? You have walked beside us, fought with us, bled like us. You are no longer Evelyn Hart, settler girl. You are something else." She hesitated. "Do I deserve that?" "No one gives a name here unless it is earned." She felt her breath catch. Then, what would it be? He didn't speak right away. Then he reached out, tapped the carved feather she wore on a leather string around her neck. Tivasani. It means hawk who stayed. Evelyn felt a tear slip down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from something deeper. A wound she didn't. No, she still carried. A wound finally beginning to heal. That night, she dreamed of fire and dust, of a girl abandoned beside a cold campfire. And in that dream, the girl stood up, took the hand of a tall shadow, and disappeared into the canyon not as prey, not as prisoner, but as a choice, as someone who could no longer be taken. Only followed. The weeks passed like river water quiet. On the surface, swift underneath. Evelyn Tivasani, as she was now known, had become more than just a stranger sheltered by the Apache. She was part of the rhythm of their life now, grinding corn at dawn, learning to braid rawhide by noon, walking alongside the healers to gather herbs at dusk. The children no longer stared. The women no longer whispered. They included her, still. Not everyone had accepted her, and outside the valley, the storm had only grown darker. The settlers had returned to their town with stories soaked in gunpowder and pride. The narrative spread fast. Evelyn Hart had been taken, seduced, corrupted. The Apache had attacked without cause. The men who died were honored as martyrs. No one told the truth. No one said. Evelyn had chosen to stay, that she had stood between rifles and warriors and begged for peace. Reverend Coates tried to temper the anger, but Amos Clary had become the loudest voice in town. His wound had become a badge. "They've got one of ours," he declared to anyone who'd listen. "And if we don't get her back, they'll take more." And so a letter was written, stamped by the town council, backed by signatures, and carried by 2 riders under the banner of civil peace. It arrived at the edge of the Apache Valley one clouded morning. The Apache elders opened the message. In silence, Dakota read the words aloud, jaw tight. "Return Miss Evelyn Hart immediately. No violence will come to your people if you comply. If not, you will be considered hostile and subject to military action. You have 5 days." They expected fear. They got resolve. "We will not trade a hawk for peace," the elder woman said flatly. Evelyn stood in the council circle as they debated. She listened, quiet but steady. Then, when the fire had burned low and the arguing ceased, she stepped forward. "I will go," she said. Gasps rippled through the circle. Dakota stood immediately. "No," she turned to him. "If I go back, maybe I can stop this. They still think I'm some fragile little girl who needs saving. If I show them otherwise, maybe they'll stop seeing the Apache as villains." "They won't listen," he warned. "I'm not going back to stay," she said. "I'm going back to speak, to burn the lies down." Dakota's voice was low. "They will try to break you." "I've already been broken," she said, "and I learned how to put myself back together." She rode out 2 days later, wearing Apache buckskin and the carved feather at her neck. Not as a prisoner, not as a bride. As a woman who made her choice and would face whatever came next with her head high. Dakota rode with her to the edge of the valley. When they reached the ridge where the desert met the trail, he stopped. "You can still turn back," he said. "I know." He reached into his pouch and handed her a knife wrapped in soft cloth. "You may need this, not for them, for yourself. In case they try to turn you into something you are not." She took it, swallowed hard, and nodded. Then she did something she hadn't dared since the day he found her under the stars. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not walking away." He closed his eyes. "Fly straight, Hawk." The return to the settlement was not what they expected. When Evelyn rode into town, people froze. Eyes widened. Mothers pulled children behind skirts. A few men reached for weapons, then paused, confused. She didn't look like the girl who had vanished. She looked stronger, wilder, unafraid. "I came back to speak," she said, standing before the gathered crowd in front of the church steps. "Not to stay? You left me behind." The Apache did not. "They fed me, sheltered me, bled beside me." "Lies," Amos spat. "You were taken, brainwashed." "No, I was saved. You only remember me because I embarrassed you." She held up the knife Dakota had given her. "This is what they gave me when I left. Not chains, not fear. A weapon to defend myself if I was betrayed." The crowd murmured. Reverend Coates, face pale, stepped forward. "Evelyn, what do you want? I want you to stop pretending I'm broken. I want you to stop sending bullets to people who only want to be left alone. I want you to remember that sometimes your own people are the ones who let you die." And with that, she turned her horse around and rode out. They did not follow. They didn't know how to. Evelyn never returned to the settlement. Word traveled over the next few years, whispers of a blonde woman riding with an Apache scout, helping birth babies, healing wounds, protecting strays. Some called her a traitor, others a ghost, but those who saw her in the high deserts standing on canyon edges with her braided hair and hawk feather necklace knew better. She hadn't been lost. She had been found.